formalized as a program with council legislation last year. And we're very excited to have currently over 150 locations citywide, with more to come this summer, over 300 blocks, over 120 community partners. And we currently manage 20 locations across the city. As we look to the future, a huge part of the program and its development and our resources is focusing on equity and trying to bring more open streets to our priority investment areas across the city, really trying to continue to evolve beyond the barricade and create more sustainable operations and designs that will allow us to cultivate partners and growth and long-term change for these corridors. And lastly, we're really focused on increasing school participation in the Open Street program. We currently have about 40 school partners now. The application remains open, and so continue to share that with all of your stakeholders and colleagues. Next slide. Getting into some background here in Prospect Heights. So we're also joined tonight by members of the Prospect Heights Neighborhood Development Council, PHNDC, who really stepped up along with other community groups, creating a citizen agency during the pandemic and managing open streets when we needed them most. PHNDC continues to be DOT's formal partner, and they're responsible for the day-to-day execution of the open street, along with the kind of longer-term thinking and planning and community engagement in the neighborhood. PHNDC is an organization that consists of a whole host of neighbors, businesses, and other members of the community. Again, we are really grateful to have such an invested partner here in our open streets. On the next slide, you'll see we have two different types of open streets currently. We have a limited local access open street Monday to Friday, and that's Underhill Avenue, where we have the barricades, and we have the limited local access, no through vehicles, only allowing pickup and drop off, local deliveries, and prioritizing the corridor for pedestrians and cyclists. Again, we're going to talk about how we're kind of moving beyond the barricade and get into greater detail with you this evening for your feedback. And then we also have the full closure, which is on Vanderbilt Avenue, which is the Friday evening, Saturday and Sunday closure. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Kyle to talk us through our community outreach and engagement.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everybody. Nice to see everyone tonight. Thanks again for having us. Now I'm going to highlight a lot of the ongoing outreach that we've been doing related to these open streets here in Prospect Heights and beyond. So just to summarize some of those efforts, we have been executing open streets here in the neighborhood actually since May 2020. This was one of the first neighborhoods in the city that was able to take advantage of open streets, starting on Underhill and Carlton Avenue actually first, and then Vanderbilt was added quickly soon thereafter in July 2021. When this program initially launched, we were definitely, geared towards COVID-19 response, but it really has pretty significantly adding on different types of layers and forward thinking that Emily just described, so on and so forth. We started our outreach efforts first off by doing a community survey a little over a year ago between February and May 2021, where we heard from about 1,500 different folks across the neighborhood, and I'll highlight some of that outreach in the coming slides. We've been doing a lot of traffic study and traffic data analysis throughout the course of the greater part of the last year and a half, and we're going to be touching on some of that in the coming weeks. Also, we've been doing a lot of community in-person workshops now that lots of us are able to be vaccinated and in-person gatherings are a little bit more safer to do. We have been able to do a series of workshops. The first in September 2021, we did 3 workshops on both Underhill and Vanderbilt, and then we did a second workshop, series of workshops, I should say, back in May, just last month. 2 workshops, one was on Underhill and Vanderbilt. And I'll summarize, like I said, all of this outreach data in the coming slides. So this particular survey data has actually already been presented to the community board when I was here back in September 2021. But this was the first set of outreach that we did where we heard from nearly 1,500 different members of the community, 80% of which lived within the confines of Community Board 8. But most folks indicated that, they're living nearby these open streets. They visit the businesses, visit friends, family, work, medical facilities, and all the sort of different types of places that we all go in our day-to-day lives. We asked pretty pointedly to the public, would they like to see different types of design changes and other treatments to make these open streets and Prospect Heights bike and pedestrian priority corridors? A full 86% of folks did say that they did want to see those changes made. And those changes meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So they wanted to see primarily more space for walking, supporting businesses through outdoor dining, coming together in a safe way through socially distanced gatherings, and other types of programming and other layers that people suggested. So building on that particular feedback from the survey that we did a little over a year ago, we hosted a series of 3 workshops back in fall 2021. This is where we were starting to get a little bit more nuanced with folks about the different types of block typologies and design changes that people wanted to see on these open streets. And we offered a couple different toolkit items that are within the DOT public space and wider DOT transportation toolkit. And people really wanted to see a lot of different things, which is good because we have a lot of blocks here to work with on the open streets on Underhill and Vanderbilt. So after we doing all of that engagement, we were able to start to formulate a little bit more of a firmer plan and building out what all of these different design changes would be for both Underhill and Vanderbilt. So when we held the workshops last month, one was on Underhill Avenue, the other was on Vanderbilt Avenue. We heard a lot of really great feedback from folks based on what we were presenting to the public design-wise. For Underhill, a lot of people really responded well to the fact that they wanted to see actual design and operational changes to the streetscape to codify bike and pedestrian priority. Really, a lot of folks also flagged that with or without open streets, we can definitely manage our curbs in a much more strategic way to facilitate the fact that we need dedicated space for loading and delivery space along both of these corridors. And a lot of people, I think we almost got a round of applause, maybe even, that the future of the Underhill Ave open street does assume that there won't be any metal barriers. As Emily said at the beginning of the presentation, that we're really trying to design our streetscape beyond the barrier and actually design our streets for the outcomes that we're looking for. The barriers definitely have a time and a place, but we're really looking to evolve beyond those particular materials and really redesign the streetscape for bike and pedestrian priority with public amenities and other traffic calming elements. Similarly, on Vanderbilt, we heard a lot of great feedback about design solutions that actually has the streetscape use design tools to codify the operations of the full closure that happens on the weekends. There's a whole, slew of different types of things that PHNDC does on a weekly basis to make that a particular closure happen. And there are certain types of street design elements that the DOT could look to implement to actually facilitate that in a more seamless way. Similarly to Underhill, really a lot of people were flagging the strong need for dedicated loading and delivery space. A constant sort of condition that we see is delivery trucks sometimes parking in the intersections, blocking certain parts of the roadway. So we want to give those entities the dedicated space that they need in order to do the really critical work that they do. And then there was also a lot of great feedback that we heard about improving the Atlantic and Vanderbilt intersection, and we'll touch on that in the coming slides. So moving on to the real meat and potatoes of tonight, we'll be talking next about the design proposal and some operational considerations. Many of you are already familiar, but we continue here in the new Adams administration with Vision Zero. We are building on the success of nearly almost a decade of work that we've been doing with Vision Zero. And really, just to briefly sum it up, it's an initiative to eliminate death and serious injuries on our streets, so making the streets safe for all road users, that's pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles. Both Underhill and Vanderbilt fall within a Vision Zero priority area for us. So these are certain sections of the city based on a lot of different types of variables, but especially traffic data, there are designated as priority areas for the agency to work in. So both corridors fall within this priority area. There are also certain priority intersections that DOT has designated through Vision Zero at Vanderbilt and Bergen, Vanderbilt and St. Mark's, Vanderbilt and Prospect Place, Vanderbilt and Park Place, as well as Underhill and St. Mark's Place. So we've specifically, tried to look at what different types of treatments are, not only available holistically across the entire corridor, but at these specific, Vision Zero intersections and priority areas for us. So just looking at some of the crash data over the last 5 years, we only have crash data currently between 2016 and 2020. In terms of Underhill Avenue between Atlantic and Eastern Parkway, we've seen quite a number of injuries and severe injuries in that time. There is a certain type of sort of data point that we use, which is called KSI, which refers to killed or severely injured, which is an aggregate of all different types of injury and fatality data. And there is about 5.1 KSI per mile within the city, which falls within the middle third of the most dangerous streets in terms of traffic crashes in the city. But we have seen a number of severe injuries between pedestrians and motor vehicles on this corridor. So there are certain, instances where we can look to make improvements because of those crashes. On Vanderbilt, unfortunately, it does fall within one of the most dangerous streets in the city. It is actually the top 10% KSI in all of Brooklyn. We've seen a number of severe injuries amongst all different types of road users between 2016 and 2020. So we're really looking to add different types of traffic calming elements along both of these corridors to sort of respond to this need for Vision Zero type treatments. So lastly, before I hand it over to Dee to walk us through some of the design elements, I'm just going to briefly summarize what our overall plan is. Really, there's a lot of different things that we're looking to implement here on Prospect Heights. We're really fortunate that we have two pretty long corridors that can see a lot of different typologies implemented along the entire stretch. On Vanderbilt, like I said, just to summarize, we're really looking to not only make 24/7 traffic calming improvements, especially at the Vanderbilt and Atlantic intersection, but also add different types of amenities and operational items to really facilitate the closure that happens on the weekends in a more seamless way. So, adding different types of space that can not only be used for storage of different types of elements, but also has bike corrals, sidewalk extensions for pedestrian circulation, planters, and all of these different types of great elements that not only, like I said, make the street safer 24/7, but add different types of public realm amenities. Similarly, on Underhill, we want to build on the success of what we've seen as evolving as a bike and pedestrian priority corridor, looking at different types of new public space additions, turning certain blocks into pedestrian plazas, facilitating two-way cycling along the entire corridor, really touting this as the next bike boulevard here in New York City, adding other different types of traffic calming elements that Dee is then going to focus on. And really just to reiterate again, a central theme is beyond the barrier, really designing our streets for the outcomes that we want to see, building on all of the things that we have really learned over the last 2 years, as well as all the conversations that we've got to have with each and every one of you who are here tonight and who have been involved with us in the ongoing outreach with these open streets. So with that, I'm going to now hand it over to Dee, who's going to go block by block and walk us through some of the design proposal items. So Dee, take it away.
Howdy, everyone. Just to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, sweet. So let's talk about Vanderbilt first. And as Kyle and Emily have sort of explained, this is more about just supporting the existing open streets operation and addressing some of that intersection and corridor safety concerns. So across the entire corridor, we've tightened down the intersections to the extent feasible, really taking away any excess roadway space that encourages people to make too fast or too wide of turns, and giving that sort of sense across the corridor that it's more of a place. And the places where the biggest interventions then would take place are on either end of the open street corridor, with the intersections of Atlantic and Plaza Street. At Atlantic, looking at a much larger intervention, which is still sort of predicated on some pending traffic analysis, but trying to reshape that sort of very intense intersection. At Plaza Street, it's more of going back to a design that's been existing for a long time and some of our toolkit for how we treat a street like that has sort of evolved. And so we can put the latest and greatest in, revisiting that intersection. And both of those intersection improvements allow us to improve the blocks feeding into it, creating a real gateway for the corridor. And then throughout the interior of the corridor, having those neighborhood loading zones that Kyle mentioned to address that feedback in our observations that, you know, a lot of times, especially during the open street operations, there just isn't a good place for trucks to be, and this is a commercial corridor. And then providing bike corrals as, you know, the main way besides transit for people to access the corridor during the open streets operation, and just to provide more bike parking on a commercial corridor that could use it. So you can, next slide. So starting on the southern section with Plaza Street. So right now, the existing two-way has been on the outside of the parking, as you can see on like the approaches to the intersection on either side. And since Plaza Street was implemented back when, we've evolved our toolkit to have the offset crossing treatment where we have a pedestrian island in between motor vehicle traffic and the bikeways, which allows pedestrians to cross bike traffic first, and then queue and assess and cross motor vehicle traffic because they're traveling at different speeds. It's just a different character. So as a real pedestrian safety benefit. In addition here, by doing that, it not only makes it a little bit safer and calmer for cyclists, who now, you know, don't have to worry about a car coming into the bike lane because there's an offset in between turning motor vehicle and the bike crossing for the driver to yield, but also allows us to carve out turn lanes for people coming from Plaza Street into Vanderbilt from either direction. And because we're tightening down that intersection, it also allows us to convert where currently the northbound bicycle facility is only Sharrows in a wide traffic lane. We can tighten that down and actually provide a bike lane and bring that block between Plaza and Sterling more into alignment with the rest of the Vanderbilt corridor in terms of those cross-sectional elements. And then you can see how we've begun to, with like Sterling and Park on the screen, really tighten down anywhere where motor vehicle capacity isn't needed to either go through the intersection or to make all the legal turns, and filling in all of that remaining space with dedicated pedestrian space, having planters in there so there's a very clear visual sense of, you know, a gateway through every intersection, and allowing us to have really wide pedestrian crossings that sort of match the kind of pedestrian volumes that Vanderbilt can see, especially during open street operations, but just in general as, you know, really wonderful commercial street. And so, yeah, you can begin to see that sequencing of the neighborhood loading zones dotted throughout the intersection. It's basically the like logic behind them is that they're on the far side of every cross street, and in a, you know, accessible place based off of what's already happening with the adjacent buildings and curb regulations. So trying to keep that sequencing of people coming to the intersection, delivery drivers, passenger pickup and drop off, and having a very clear and expected sort of place where they know that they can stop and not interrupt the open street operations. And so, yeah,
Quickly
just
before you move on, one quick just clarification, the yellow spots, the bulb out on the corners, the pedestrian islands, are those raised or are those painted in the first iteration of this?
Painted.
Thank
So in the short term, in the capital vision that will at some point follow, we'll be able to build out those corners. For this year, the implementation will just be paint with flexible delineators, the epoxy gravel that we use to fill it in, and then sort of marked and reinforced with planters, both from an aesthetic, but also like from a functional standpoint. And you can also see, continuing to have planters where feasible in the medians and trying to continue that continuity of, the blocks that do have trees planted in the medians and trying to continue that sort of visual sense that you get on the best parts of Vanderbilt. You can go to the next slide. And so again, also having that sequencing of bike corrals where alternating on either side of the intersection on either side of the street for the most part, having bike corrals here at Park, because it's sort of the beginning of the corridor and some limitations between Park and Sterling. We have it on both sides. Making sure that we preserve the existing loading zone for Food Town, which is self-evidently important. And then, so on the couple blocks where we have the left turn on either end, again, sort of like how revisiting Plaza Street, those entry tapers, the entry into the left turn lanes, we're keeping the number of cars that can actually be stored in the left turn lane, but making it a slightly tighter entry to come in, which is based on our current standards, just revisiting the street design. And that's nice because it does create an opportunity space that sort of is just available right now to come into the left turn lane faster than you otherwise would need to. Allows us to have more space sort of separated from motor vehicle traffic. And yeah, and then just continuing again, wherever possible, narrowing down the intersection and widening those crosswalks to fill the space. You can go to the next slide, Kyle.
Sorry for the interruption. I'm just wondering about, is there any loading zone for Food Town on any of the like perpendicular blocks for when Open Streets is happening?
If you want to go back to the previous slide, Kyle. So there is, this is an apology. There should be additional loading zones shown on this slide. I'm sorry that they're not on here. But yes, there is a loading zone on Park and a loading zone on Prospect proposed. Thank you for that question. So going forward, there's an existing bike corral that is has not been installed due to an open restaurant at Bergen. And then because we're trying to do this sequencing, this repetition rhythm throughout the corridor, instead of disrupting that open restaurant, you can see here that fitting into the pattern, we're proposing other locations now, tightening those intersections down, tightening that painted median for the left turn bay entries, revisiting the pocket lane on Bergen, where we can add green paint per, again, standards that have evolved since that was installed originally. Putting in planters to both reinforce the geometry, but also to provide, an aesthetic benefit to the corridor. And you can see, again, those neighborhood loading zones on the far side of each intersection. You can go to the... and then just giving a taste of what we're proposing in Atlantic, because it would be a pretty substantial intervention, but unfortunately we'll have to come back with the traffic analysis once it's completed, just because making such significant changes on Atlantic requires a lot of a much larger zoom out on the network and what the repercussions would be. But the goals here are to basically protect the cyclist crossing and reduce the distances and just make better crossings for pedestrians. And a lot of that space is provided by carving out from what is currently dedicated turn lanes. But again, unfortunately, we don't have that traffic analysis completed yet due to its complexity. And potentially removing some of the storage for southbound Vanderbilt, which currently has 2 lanes, and due to the open streets operations and some other changes may not be necessary, and may be able to keep sort of that, again, one travel lane in each direction for the most part that you see throughout the corridor. You can go to the next slide, Kyle. Were there any specific questions about that before I jump to Underhill?
Let's do the whole presentation, and then we'll come back to specific questions. And to the attendees, if you want to put things in the chat, we will revisit them at the end of the presentation.
Sweet. So jumping ahead to Underhill, which is sort of, if Vanderbilt's about kind of supporting the existing open street operations and how Vanderbilt has sort of always functioned as a commercial street, Underhill is sort of different in that it's kind of a re-envisioning or an evolution of the open street as its next phase, without the barricades and stuff, functioning more like a bike boulevard, as a calmed, sort of beautiful street that doesn't have this active management component to the same degree. And so here, there's a number of conversions from 2-way to 1-way between St. John's and Eastern Parkway, between Park and Prospect, and between Bergen and St. Mark's, and then a full closure between Pacific and Atlantic, which becomes basically an extension of the triangle, like we've done elsewhere along Fulton in numerous locations nearby. And then on the blocks that remain 2-way, providing a traffic calming element, since we don't want to rely on the barricades and we want this to function more as a 24/7 facility, rather than just during a specific window of time. And we can get into the specifics of why that's the choice in traffic calming, as opposed to like Vanderbilt, where it's tightening down the intersections. And that largely has to deal with the width of Underhill versus the width of Vanderbilt, where there is excess space. Underhill is very constrained, and that's not really the source of the issue or the opportunity to improve. And then adding one by corral where it's been requested. And we can take this opportunity implementing our SIP to put that in place. And I think the important thing to note here is that you can see that the 1-way conversions using that space more wisely is in front of the playground and in front of PS9. So it's where there's the largest pet generation and generators, and where, there's the highest expectation of children crossing and being near the roadway, as well as, again, having some sort of gateway treatments on either end of the corridor. You can jump, yeah. So the design and the sort of design thinking for Underhill builds off of the experience that we've had the last couple of years now of beginning to do bike boulevards in New York City. There was one implemented in each borough as the initial launch of the program. After a lot of years of advocacy, trying to get New York City to do something a little bit different than like just putting in a bike facility. It's a little bit more about creating a sense and a vibe to a corridor that makes it feel very, so that drivers coming into the corridor have a pretty clear sense that there's something different going on here. Trying to divert motor vehicle volumes away and get speeds really low, and just bringing people into the roadway, making it feel very safe and sort of neighborhoody. And we've been using these in locations that are more residential. It's not a treatment that, it's like Jackson Avenue in the Bronx or Netherland Avenue in Staten Island. These aren't, major arterials. It's not the sort of treatment and way we approach like the avenues in Manhattan, or even what we would be thinking on Vanderbilt. It's really something that fits kind of the character and the network function of Underhill. You can go on to the next slide. And so 39th Avenue in Sunnyside is a great example of this. You'll see a lot of similarities in this design to what we're proposing for Underhill. Again, I think an important thing to understand about Underhill design-wise is it is very narrow. Sort of all the existing elements of it are at or like just under our minimums as an agency for the most part. 39th Avenue is a little wider, so this is maybe the version of this that has like a little bit more breathing room, but you'll see it's very similar in concept between the two. And here the street alternates between one way in one direction, one way in the other direction, and being two-way to sort of divert some of that traffic off and make it so that there's still local access. If you need to do something on Underhill or on 39th Ave, you still can with a motor vehicle, but there's a clear sense of priority. It's very easy to ride side by side. I think probably the best way to describe the bike boulevards for people who aren't familiar with them is that it's a street that you feel very comfortable, going at a slow speed, biking with a friend, having a conversation, or teaching your kids how to ride a bike. It's that kind of facility, not, commuting down Second Avenue from like Fidei to the Upper East Side. Second Avenue goes southbound, if anybody caught that. First Avenue. So going through the design at Eastern Parkway, having a little bit of a gateway treatment, and where it's just very clear as you're approaching, reinforcing with a wider crosswalk and with a bike crossing, that you're approaching an intersection where there's a higher than usual expectation of cyclists and pedestrians in the roadway. The kind of most important or thing that probably stands out the most here is that the motor vehicle access for these two blocks of Underhill at the south end would be from Lincoln Place now, with two-way travel for cycling. Of course, FDNY can come into either block accessing from Eastern Parkway and turning right to access the lower end, or if it was FDNY is coming from St. John's, they can always pull in. So because this is only for a block in either direction, there's still access for FDNY even from the opposite direction. But and again, having that two-way access maintained for cyclists, and you can see on the Lincoln to St. John's Place, basically that same cross section as was shown on 39th Avenue in Queens. And the difference for why the Eastern to Lincoln block is a little bit different. One is just, it's very calm, but also that east curb has 2 fire hydrants and the long driveway to the garages. And so, just having the curbside bike lane is just infeasible due to the fact that it would just be like a lot of hatching. It just doesn't really work out design-wise. But the biggest benefit to this traffic flow change is that because the intersection is away and away, we can put in a pedestrian crossing and have a nice island, and that little commercial section is much better sort of like tied in to the corridor. And then I'll talk about it further in the next slide, but having the Lincoln St. John's block be northbound only gives us a lot more space to tighten down that skewed intersection and improve the geometry there, which is just that acute turn is very hard to make properly. And by removing one movement from the intersection, it just sort of simplifies its operations. Next, yeah. So you just have fewer conflicts, wider crosswalks. It's just a more navigable intersection for non-motorized street users. And then, so getting into what kind of the majority of the corridor looks like, you have the existing two-way blocks where we're doing the median traffic calming, still tightening down like we did on Underhill with painted pedestrian extensions. But here, the only place that it really fits and still allows like FDNY and DSNY to make turns is kind of one corner. It's the like in and in corner of each intersection. But that still allows, as you're driving up and down and approaching from the side streets, it still gives us an opportunity to put planters and make a sense as you're approaching the street that you're coming to something sort of special and different and not, largely for processing motor vehicle traffic. So it signals to drivers ahead of time. And that's also a big part of the median traffic calming, is that it still gives an element that visually the corridor is sort of broken up and you don't get a sense that you can just drive through, trying to catch the lights as fast as you can. It sort of breaks it up and creates kind of a rhythm of space, beautiful, like interesting things, rather than seeing that sort of tunnel vision of being able to speed down the corridor when you have the green. And like a lot of the bike boulevards, is more reliant on shared lane markings with the goal of just keeping motor vehicle volumes and speeds lower, so it's not as big of a deal to share the roadway. And because that tightness and Underhill being so much more narrow than, say, Vanderbilt, instead of being able to put those larger bulb outs, what we can do without really impacting parking at all is still have our green touch of just having planters, which also can conveniently host signs as needed, but having them at the entries into the block. So again, reinforcing that sense of like you're approaching something sort of special and different. You can go to the next. So getting into that median traffic calming a little bit better, you can see here a simulation of how some vehicles go through it. So this is very similar to like the chicanes we've done throughout the city. If anyone's familiar with the chicanes that are on Willoughby Avenue that are much tighter and have had a number of issues, this is very different from that. Those, due to some uniqueness and just trying something different, are a lot tighter, and this meets more sort of existing standards of where we've done chicanes throughout the city that haven't faced those same issues. A good example, sort of geometrically, is at 6th Avenue and 21st Street. These are built out in concrete. The ones we're proposing would be, again, paint the epoxy gravel as like a fill in the space, and then using planters, granite blocks, flexible delineators to reinforce it. Can be a nice space to sit in, enjoy, but still gives that horizontal deflection, to use technical terms, that will slow vehicles down. This is actually something that's been in FHWA's traffic calming e-primer for a long time. We haven't really used it mid-block in the city much. We've done it more at intersections because we tend to do this at wider streets. On Underhill, you can't fit it into the intersections without having more significant impacts on traffic flow. So you can see, if you're approaching northbound to, let's say, Park, with the one-ways, you would have to turn to go eastbound on Park Place. But since we've seen the majority of traffic going through Underhill on southbound, and that's kind of its prevailing function as we've looked at the traffic numbers, we've maintained that and gotten rid of the northbound simply because it has less of an impact and allows us then to reallocate that space here in front of the playground, where we can even have a crossing and a little island to make it accessible from the roadway at the very entrance to the playground, allow contraflow cyclists to still continue through the corridor, tighten down intersections where we can on that one corner per block, put in green touches where we can't tighten down the intersection, and then have the median traffic calming on the two-way blocks. You can go to the next. Same thing in front of PS9, where the school entrance has a very clearly delineated space. And same sort of traffic flow. Both of the southbound blocks occur at cross streets that divert you to the east. So it functions very similarly, tightening down the intersections. Underhill is much more just sort of a repeating pattern, block by block. Next. Adding that bike corral where it was requested at Dean Street, which is convenient because that also is the intersection or the corner of the intersection that works geometrically to have a bulb out. So it ties into that bulb out. And then at the triangle, that existing driveway, we've spoken with representatives of the property owner that they would be interested in abandoning it. So there's a real opportunity here to extend the triangle all the way through the street and make the frontage to that block, Washington, and create a good end to the corridor, and kind of further the geometric improvements that were done years ago at Washington and Atlantic to simplify that intersection, and make it a little bit more predictable. We still see that illegal left turn being made into Underhill, when right now you're only supposed to approach it from the eastbound right. So this alleviates the safety concerns that come with that movement still taking place. Um, so the plaza would be able to host tables and chairs, programming, would still allow FDNY, would still have a access route through the plaza, where no heavier elements would be able to be placed, and the city bike station would remain where it is. So it also allows for a convenient place for people to dock or get a bike and then enter into Underhill. You can go to the next. And so just elaborating on some of these design elements, this is that problem that I think everyone is probably seen at least once on, especially Vanderbilt, is trucks blocking the open street because they don't have a convenient place to go, and making sure that we have one of our neighborhood loading zones placed at kind of every cross street in a predictable place. And we're doing this across our open streets throughout the city, where we're formalizing them in SIPs. So this becomes, for delivery drivers who are working all around New York, hopefully this becomes something very predictable and known to them. Next. How some of our shared streets work. So especially for the plaza at the north end of Underhill, this is like how Putnam Triangle was extended into the roadway. It'd be very similar to how this plaza functions, and how like Fowler Square eventually, was built out in Capitol as an extension of that triangle. So, very similar spaces already nearby. For Vanderbilt, you can see how, the planters and that painted pedestrian extension space just sort of tightens down the intersection, becomes an extension of the sidewalk, and just sort of changes the like sense of the space that you have as you pass through it, and for people that are staying there to enjoy it. So that completes the design that we're presenting. So I'll throw it back.
Thanks so much, Dee. And thanks everybody. We are really looking forward to answering more questions and hearing your feedback on this next iteration of the design. I think it's important to keep in mind that we do see this as a first iteration, and there'll be kind of more monitoring and an evolution of both of these corridors to come. We think we're going to learn a lot. And so this is definitely not kind of a once and done type presentation. This, will be an investment in the ongoing design and management of both of these corridors and in the neighborhood moving forward. To address a lot of the questions we got in the chat, our traffic analysis is currently underway, and we're going to be looking at a whole host of things. We have all of the pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle volumes. We have all of the intersections and turning movement counts at various places along both the Vanderbilt, Underhill, and Washington Avenue corridors. And so a key part of our work will be to incorporate your feedback and also have updates on the traffic study, which we plan to come back and present to you all in September. And then we will work to implement the project. I think we would like tonight to specifically hear your thoughts on Vanderbilt Avenue and some of the loading zones, because we do think those are treatments that could go in earlier and help with the kind of current operation of the full closure of Vanderbilt. So anyway, looking forward to hearing more from everyone and answering folks' questions.
Emily, thank you. Kyle, Dee, thank you guys very much. Lee, you too. Thank you, DOT. It's always amazing to see what you come up with. I'm always bowled over by the vision, the ability to look at our streets, the streets we see every day, day in and day out, and think differently about them and come up with new and creative ways to deal with the finite space. So thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure we look forward to giving you lots of constructive criticism and feedback on it. Just because we got started in such a rush at 6:30, I want to just sort of tee things up a little bit before we go into the Q&A portion. I'm Robert Witherwax. I'm the chair of this committee. Mark Thurton, my co-chair, is joining us too. I just want everyone to be aware that we are being live streamed on YouTube, so keep your questions PG-13 or better. Again, I just want to thank our representatives from DOT for those questions. And since we are being live streamed for the posterity, the chat doesn't get recorded in the same way. So I'm going to actually pop some of the chat questions, even though Emily, you did just address a lot of the themes in those questions. I'm just going to read them for the record as we go through. And hopefully in about 10 minutes, we'll be done with this. Question, does ridership data support the number of bike corrals proposed for Vanderbilt Avenue? Any thoughts from DOT on that?
I mean, I could jump in. I mean, I think if you've ever been on a Vanderbilt Avenue on a Saturday or Sunday, especially on a nice day even, you can really see the number of bikes that we see out there. I've personally witnessed people not really even having enough sufficient, bike parking along the corridor. So it is arguable that there is a huge need for it. There are some bike corrals that are already on Vanderbilt that exist, but we do see that there is a pretty big demand. The number of cyclists that use the corridor is in the hundreds, if not thousands, on a daily basis. So there definitely is a big, huge demand, and our agency really has been especially committed to adding a lot more bike parking in the next 2 years, especially. So we are keenly interested in adding a lot more where possible. We even recently had a secure bike parking pilot that we did on Vanderbilt Avenue with the Unipod that saw a lot of great success, and it's going to different sites around the city, and we would love to continue the conversations related to that type of bike parking in the future as well.
Thank you. What is going to be implemented relying on this review? So tonight's review, again, is feedback to you guys. There may be some things, following up on what Emily just said, that are implemented over the summer, but most of the implementation is going to follow the traffic study, which will drop in the late summer, early fall. Question, bus boarding islands. Did you consider them for the B69 stops on Vanderbilt Avenue?
We did not. I mean, we can speak to our transit team to get more specific data and follow up offline, but bus boarding islands tend to be allocated to stops where there is both a tremendous amount of ridership, but also related to the overall traffic flow and the frequency of buses to help with again the flow and timing. But if folks are interested in more details, we can share that.
So the southbound segment of Vanderbilt between Sterling and Plaza, so the very southernmost leg, you didn't reduce that to one lane. Was that deliberate? Did you need to keep 2 lanes of through traffic for cars?
It's preserving the existing storage. When we get the results of the traffic analysis, we can touch base on that again, but because that block is shorter, it's likely going to be necessary.
And storage being a technical term, it means the number of cars that you can, moving cars, not parked cars, that are at a given light at a given time, right?
Yeah. Correct.
The comment was made about overflow traffic onto Franklin, Washington, Classen when Underhill and Vanderbilt are closed. And I believe that it was answered further down in the chat that part of the complete traffic analysis will include proposed mitigations for Washington, Franklin, et cetera, including signal timing adjustments and additional pedestrian safety traffic calming elements like neck down. So this is, those other avenues are not going to be orphans in this whole project. Consideration to lengthening the food town loading zone to the whole block. Right now, sometimes, and again, we'll observe this in the mornings, and especially on weekend mornings, 2 trucks will double park on the side. It's problematic now, but may be more of an issue with the redesign. So the loading zone, must it stay in front of Food Town, or can it expand north to south? And the point was made further in the chat that Food Town doesn't have an issue with the size of the loading zone, but it may have other impacts with the project.
And I'll just add too that, you know, we've been working with PHNDC and Food Town in close coordination, trying to make any accommodations that we really can for Food Town, especially in the context of the existing open streets. But as it was just mentioned, you know, Food Town sees that they have a sufficient amount of space, but we're also going to be adding more loading zones that are on the cross streets that, of course, can be used to serve Food Town, as well as some of the other businesses on the block that, of course, have some sort of curbside need when they get deliveries. So, you know, we'll continue those conversations, and loading zones are a pretty flexible tool for us to look and implement. So if the rationale is to expand it and the need is there, we definitely could explore that.
Great. Can the planters and the painted medians be arranged to physically prevent cars from parking? I have to think the answer is yes. And in fact, that's the intention. And also a very nice compliment. Thank you for all the work and the great outreach. This is all very exciting. It's good to pass on compliments every now and then. Question, Vanderbilt is dangerous for bike commuters and pedestrians due to motor vehicle congestion, reduced sidewalk space, and the loss of Underhill Avenue as a north-south corridor. Why are speed bumps not being considered for Vanderbilt Avenue between Atlantic and Pacific? Is that something you threw in there, or is that because of the buses?
Yeah, typically we avoid speed humps on bus routes. But again, I think our strategy there is more about clarifying and normalizing that intersection.
What is the rationale for Vanderbilt and Underhill having different opening hours? Again, the point was made later in the chat that, well, the vision for Underhill is now for it to be a 24/7 design driven as opposed to labor driven open street. And the Vanderbilt open street just has operating hours that correspond with the businesses. Question, did you do traffic counts of the left turns on Vanderbilt? Are they all really needed? Could there be some space taken from those to expand the median or some of the turns? I guess the flip side of that is, did you look into banning any left turns?
Yeah, so we did take intersection turn counts, and that will be something we'll be looking at as part of the overall analysis.
Great. And when you do that, will the traffic studies are completed, will they be available for review?
Yes, I mean, we'll provide some amount of detail in our presentation, and then folks can always follow up for additional details.
Another specific Vanderbilt configuration question. Could the bike lanes be protected at the corners of Vanderbilt and Bergen and Dean? And to the questioner, do you mean the north-south bike lanes or the east-west bike lanes? Or all of the above, I guess.
Well, so I read that question in the chat as being the east-west bike lanes, but I can address it for both. In the north-south, unfortunately, the distance between the median and the curb line and stuff on Vanderbilt kind of precludes it. There's some possibility, but with the bus stops and some of the other things going on at the curbs, it's a little bit more complicated when we get the results of the traffic analysis back, since there's those turn lanes and stuff there. There might be opportunities to reallocate some roadway space to make it work. But since they're both buffered bike lanes currently, cross-sectionally, the facility itself, there's more potential for the east-west, but it wouldn't be possible for the north-south.
Thank you. Do you guys know of any efforts or plans to create open streets elsewhere in CB8 aside from the ones these two and the one over by Weeksville?
So Open Streets is an application-driven program, so we would welcome any new applications from organizations, whether they be formal or informal, to participate in the program. More so than ever before, do we have a lot of resources on the table to support partners as they execute Open Streets with funding, materials, programming support, technical assistance, and in certain instances, a full suite of maintenance, sanitation, and horticultural care. So we would welcome any applications. If there are any groups that are here tonight or that you may know of, I'll drop my email in the chat and you can feel free to reach out to me to talk through ideas. But right now we just have Vanderbilt, Underhill, and the new one that Rob had mentioned with Weeksville on Buffalo Avenue, which is actually launching this weekend.
Great. Another configuration question. Can the loading zones be located on the side of the street opposite the bike lane on Bergen, for instance, to prevent unnecessary conflict between cyclists and trucks?
I think somebody commented already that it's because of what's happening on the opposite curb. So, you know, we'd have to locate it like past the bus stop. And then at that point, there's a question of whether it would actually be used for deliveries on Vanderbilt if you had to go 100 feet almost into the intersection or into the block. But we can think about that further. But aware of like that's not the ideal circumstance to have them crossing the bike lane.
Yeah, agreed. I'm just checking through the questions to make sure that there's nothing else substantive that we wanted to hit that wasn't already answered in the chat. Many people are concerned about theft of their bikes. Will cameras be provided for bike corrals for privately owned bikes? Is there any security measures that the city takes on, or are these things that the partner establishment? Is it still the same program where there's a business that curates the bike corral?
No, so two things. One, DOT does not have or supply cameras for security of bike corrals. The bike corrals will be part of the overall maintenance of the corridor. And there was also a question about, will some of the bike corrals be UNI? They will not. They will be DOT's standard bike corrals. UNI was a pilot. So just the normal hoops that you see, like the one that's in front of Milk Bar currently.
Great. And just got to throw in a plug for Containerized Trash Pilot. We'd love to have a containerized trash program come to CB8. I know that's not you guys, but if you know anybody over at sanitation, start talking in their ears. We'd love to see it. Are speed cushions as deployed on bus routes in Staten Island an option for Vanderbilt? Speed cushions.
It's not a tool that we are considering currently. Again, I think our interest is really at the intersections. So all of the design along Vanderbilt is shortening pedestrian crossings, helping to slow turns, helping to narrow the passage for vehicles kind of cutting across Vanderbilt. So our focus right now really is at the intersections and providing safety there.
And again, just looking for things that go to the design. Lots of love in the chat for the designs. Will there be an increase of permanent street furniture as part of any of the changes? Fixed benches and such. Is that anything you're contemplating?
We could certainly take a look at options for additional public seating with our City Bench program. I believe folks were asking about the median. The median is more challenging just due to ADA accessible kind of distances and turnarounds and access generally. So we typically try to provide amenities that are fully accessible. But I think we'll, continue to work with PHNDC to bring out the movable furniture so that particularly when there are the full street closures, there's more seating options that's just open to the general public and not necessarily associated with an individual business.
Great. And then the last question in the chat about configuration is actually one I had too. So you're on the bike boulevard of Underhill Avenue, you go to the very north end and you hit Atlantic Avenue, and then you take your life in your hands and go forth. Is that something that's being considered, the transatlantic, if you will, passage of Underhill Avenue, biking northbound?
Yes, and we've discussed this thoroughly with the bike unit that tends to handle those larger network development projects. With a lot of the bike boulevards, they're more like neighborhood circulation and a calmer route. I mean, the short answer is that the intersection is just very challenging. There just really isn't anywhere on Washington Avenue to receive that bike traffic on the north side. And so
I guess we'll have to redesign Atlantic next.
yeah. But I mean, it does feed into Bergen and Dean, and extending it, you know, is access largely to the Triangle and Plaza, that City Bike Station. So really, in terms of network, it sort of feeds in from the Eastern Parkway path into the Bergen and Dean routes. And then just has like a stub that goes one more block in terms of its larger network function. But it would be great to be able to get across Atlanta.
Just turning back from the configuration question to the process questions, Emily, can you just run us through the date lines, the milestones on that last slide one more time? When are we going to hear from you next? What are we going to hear about you? And what's the whole timeline for rolling this out?
Absolutely, thanks. So we are planning to complete our traffic study and incorporate feedback that we heard tonight and come back to the board in September. All of the kind of major Underhill proposals, as well as any of the traffic mitigation proposals like on Washington or Franklin, those are all dependent on the traffic analysis. So we would not be implementing any of those changes until we present the traffic analysis in September. I think as part of a phase one, we are interested in seeing if we could start to implement some of the signage changes that would help allow for the neighborhood loading zones, which we've heard from the community is a really critical need for the current Vanderbilt Ave open street operations. You know, that is something that we're interested in working towards earlier. But though none of those locations, along with the neck downs and bike corrals, are related to the traffic analysis.
Right. And again, I'm conscientious of the fact that you guys are the open streets department. You do not speak for the entirety of DOT and any sort of master planning. Though Lee's here, he can speak on behalf of the entire borough of Brooklyn. So I'm sure he's welcome to do that. Are there any? I see Mr. Crash's hand. Are there any other hands raised with questions in person? Just feel free to pop your hand up if you want. But Peter, take it away.
Thanks for giving me a chance to talk. I did have a couple questions because I did continue to have a. I mean, I'm sure I'm just not hearing this the way I'm just. This is a lot of info to take in and process. But first off, in terms of I just have a couple questions, by the way. The first, in terms of the implementation, I think you just said the loading zone element might be implemented before the next go round with the community board. But just to clarify about the what would happen in the fall. Now, would we be getting a presentation again with this traffic study, or is it just the traffic studies are going to get presented?
We will present an updated design plan along with the traffic study to just provide the support and backing for some of the additional decisions that we're making.
Okay.
So it will be, you'll see the comprehensive design again, any necessary updates due to the traffic study, as well as key parts of the traffic study itself.
And that would be to the EST committee and then the community board 8 at general meeting?
So we leave
Probably
it.
just to this committee.
Yeah.
Just to this committee, even if we choose to vote? Can I, so that, and I just, because I this is a very different character, this meeting, to some of the other ones I've attended on Open Streets. And we did have a big problem with the entry. You know, we opened the meeting 15 minutes late because the links didn't work. Do we have a quorum, Mr. Witherwax? Would be a good question. And
Yeah, last I counted, we did.
okay, great. And so I guess I wanted to ask about the investment in Underhill a little bit, because I think the we have a comprehensive plan that's unfolding, that will be starting this which is meant to address the upzoning of Atlantic Avenue, and you have Lowry Triangle, and I think Emily from DOT was really kind enough to talk to me a little bit during the workshop, and she's talked about how Lowry Triangle had been considered by city planning and DOT for a long time in relation to the redevelopment of Atlantic. So I guess would be helpful to have a little clarity about that, and also about the any capital funding or anything that might be contemplated for that or assigned to it already. And the other question, just as almost more of an observation, is about the loading zones, because I did kind of do a walkthrough of the workshop and everything. And I learned about the loading zones because we had the benefit of a healthy interaction. But it isn't really part of the presentation that the community had. So when the community, to my view, a lot of community members probably were unaware that the loading zones are being contemplated. So off of Vanderbilt especially. So I'm just, where is this the one time that the public will be aware that before they're implemented, before like this is the one moment when there'll be a public vetting of those loading zones and the idea of it before they're implemented?
Great. So yeah, thanks, Peter. That's a really great set of questions. So I'll work backwards. So loading zones were something we did talk about with the community at our public workshops. That's something that we've been receiving feedback via surveys and conversations with residences as well as merchants in the district. So it is responsive to what we've been hearing. In terms of implementation, we certainly, I mean, we're presenting it tonight, and we will be again coming back in the fall. Loading zones are a sign, and so it's again something that we can continue to monitor use, and it's a relatively flexible element to be able to adjust to issues and opportunities. I will say that as part of any implementation, we do work with our community partner in this case, along with the board and elected officials, to get the word out about implementation. So we'll create a flyer with project details and make sure that folks have not only advance notice of these changes being made, but also share some information about the goal and how these types of loading zones are used, as well as the other aspects of the project. So we do really want to make sure that there's time for folks to know what's coming. In relation to Lowry Triangle, I mean, I'm sure many of you actually remember many years back, a pedestrian was hit crossing Atlantic Avenue, and there was a call, I believe, from members of CB8 to close that portion of Underhill. As part of that project, our pedestrian unit implemented significant safety improvements at the Washington and Atlantic Avenue location. So again, it's been a location that has been on the radar for folks for a long time, and definitely an opportunity for public space overall in the district. So So we are in conversations with our colleagues at City Planning as well as the Parks Department to make sure that we're all coordinated as various planning and capital project efforts move forward in the district.
But in terms of the, excuse me, in terms of any capital assigned or any, I mean, what's the status of capital in Lowry Triangle? Was there?
So DOT does have a capital project at that location that previous to the pandemic had incorporated kind of reconfiguring the triangle and some intersections at the Pacific location, as well as some intersections further to the south. So again, as as we finalize a design here and as we move forward, we will certainly make sure that our work is tied into the larger capital planning effort.
And Rob, I think mentioned that, and I think it said in the chat that there would be tweaks of Washington and some of the other avenues with signal timing. So, I mean, my observation about Underhill is that it isn't what's being done is not so much an open street. It's kind of more of a, well, I think it might even have been described at least once as really a change from a community street or a through street to a local street. And so there will be traffic diversion. And in fact, I've heard a bunch of community members refer to the goal of the effort as, in a way, traffic diversion. So I kind of want, and I think that given that we are going to see a upzoning of Atlantic Avenue, which is going to add a lot of new people to the area and a lot of more cars. I mean, that does suggest like a thinking a little really carefully about what's going to happen to some of these other north-south streets. And I raise that in part just from Atlantic Yard's experience, because I mean, I know there's some other really well-educated people about Atlantic Yards on this call, but you know, the number of north-south avenues or travel lanes in Prospect Heights was reduced pretty significantly by the project. And this is a further reduction of the north-south travel lanes. And I don't own a car. I'm not a car advocate. I'm all for pedestrians, especially in every possible way. But I do want to, I would hate to see changes happen which are going to have to be addressed or are going to create conditions or create situations that are not going to be as addressable for other avenues like Washington, even Vanderbilt, honestly, during times Underhill is closed. So I'm kind of questioning first, I mean, will we have a chance to, I mean, some of the traffic studies you're relying on, because you've gotten really far with this, you must already be completed. Can you share any of the traffic studies, the scope of the studies, the timing of the studies? Be super helpful to be able to see as much as possible so we can all get a kind of get a little more confidence that this is a good choice of priority. And I just would say, because I'm really, you know, very concerned about pedestrians generally. I'm also coming at this from the point of view that I know two people who have been hit in crosswalks on 6th Avenue, and DOT hasn't done anything there. So hasn't responded at all, and quite seriously injured in one case in the hospital, to my understanding, for 2 months. So can we just, you know, talk a little bit about priority in relation to Underhill relative to other north-south avenues on or travel lanes in Prospect Heights?
Sure. So I think there are a couple different things. All of our traffic counts have been collected, and we've been working with our traffic engineering team. Generally, we are looking at the relationship between Vanderbilt and Underhill. Given that Vanderbilt is such a high volume corridor, we want to make sure we understand where we can mitigate any adverse impacts from completely closing the corridor as an open street. typically we see high PM peaks on at that kind of Friday when Vanderbilt closes, and so we've responded over the past couple years of opening up Underhill and not having it be a limited local access street during that time. Generally, though, from looking at the larger traffic network, I mean, we have the major artery of Vanderbilt and of Washington, and overall, Underhill is a community local network street. It doesn't go anywhere. It is really just servicing those interior blocks. So it really overall has incredibly low volumes, and is folks not necessarily moving through the neighborhood, but folks accessing the neighborhood. The other I think the other kind of overall network relationship that we are very conscious of is this is a neighborhood that does have incredibly high volume, very traffic centric corridors around its entire perimeter. And so Underhill really does provide an opportunity to create the bike boulevard, the slow street where folks can be, feel very comfortable that we have low, slow-moving vehicles and overall prioritizing pedestrians and cyclists. It's also an important corridor with a school and a playground, and so we feel like all those uses, in addition to a primarily residential street, really makes a lot of sense for this type of traffic calming. All that said, our design is paint and gravel, and obviously, as the neighborhood continues to shift and change, we'll continue to watch and evolve our designs. We might see cycling quadruple, or we might see other uses and changes in the neighborhood. So again, I just want to reiterate, this is we feel an important next phase to start to solve through design some of the kind of issues and opportunities that we've seen over the past 2+ years of the open street, and we'll continue to work with the board, with the larger community, to design these streets to meet everybody's needs.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Thank you very much for your time.
One more question, Rob. Just would you
One more
mind?
here.
Okay. So Emily, would you share the studies and scopes of studies that are underway, like the results that you're looking at with I mean, it sounds like you're pretty much ready to share a lot of that already.
So we don't have results yet. Again, we have all the data, and we've been combing through the data and finding some major trends and things like that. But our traffic analysis team is currently working on the study, and that's what we'll bring back to you in September.
Can you share the scope? The scope of the studies that you're using? That's not results. That's just a description of what's being studied. That could be shared right away.
Sure. I mean, so you're literally looking for every single intersection where we collected counts. And again, the scope of the study is looking at this design and looking at Vanderbilt, at Underhill, and at the larger whatever impacts come out of these design scenarios. We will look at mitigations for Washington or anywhere else in the network where we're seeing issues. This is done in-house. It's not like we have a written scope for a consultant. This is our own transportation engineers.
So all the more reason for us to maybe take a look and make sure it's comprehensive. And I think in doing the job, I mean, I just think it makes sense for us to have the scope of what you're studying, since this is going to change Prospect Heights forever, and DOT isn't going to back down. I doubt. I really seriously doubt it's going to back down from any of these changes, most of which I support personally, but I actually would like to know what the effects are going to be on the other streets. So
this is one of those moments where I defer to the experts, and the experts in determining that determination have spoken, and I thank them for their time. tonight, and I look forward to them coming back with all of what you've heard tonight in mind in September, and maybe fill in some of these gaps a little more in a written format too, would be great. But thank you. Any final questions for our friends from DOT? Great. Fior?
Yes, I have a question, and I don't have a strong connection, so if you can't hear me, please let me know.
You're coming through just fine.
Okay, great. I just want to say that the design for Underhill looks great, but I just want to ask, is the investment in Underhill support the usage? Because it seems that every time I pass by and other neighbors of mine pass by, it's kind of underutilized, and it's been talked about at these meetings as well. So I am surprised at the investment that is being made on Underhill.
I'll actually, there was a really good comment in the chat, which I think was head on with this, which is that right now, for the last two plus years, we've been living with the barricades. And from my point of view, Underhill has been severely underutilized from a lot of perspectives due to the existence of the barricades. The barricades are going away. This street is going to become a travel street as well as in its new form. So I think, yeah, the investment is going to cure a lot of the conditions that maybe have been noticed and looked at over the last 2 or 3 years. So I think that that helps a lot. I think this design restores a lot of what has been removed in the last 2 or 3 years. Any other questions? Great. Well, again, thank you, DOT. The committee, the EST committee, does have a few items of committee business. So everyone is welcome to stick around and watch us go through our 2 items of committee business. I am going to, but you're also free to leave if you don't want to do that. I'm going to call the roll, and we'll make sure we have a quorum to do this business. Desmond Atkins. Julia Boyd. Janet Collins. Ellen Gerber. You. Karen Gray.
Here.
Thank you. Saskia Hagens.
Present.
Thank you. Igenie Harris Blenman.
Present.
Thank you. Jennifer Jordan.
Present.
Thank you. Zerzima Jordan.
Present.
Thank you. Regina Kinsey. Peter Crashes.
Here.
Thank you. Francis Langley.
I'm here, but I'm gonna have to leave y'all at 8 o'clock. I have another meeting.
No worries. You're counted for quorum, Ms. Langley. Thank you. William Meehan.
Here.
Thank you. Fior Ortiz Joyner.
Present.
Thank you. Celeste Stern was here, but I believe she's had to leave. Carrie Tan.
Here.
Thank you. Mark Thurton.
Here.
So Mark, I'll mark him
Here.
present.
I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thurton. Ethel Tyus. I saw Ethel there. I'm looking at Ethel right there. Robert Witherwax, yes. Irsa Weatherspoon. Deborah Young.
Here.
Thank you. We have 15 members present. We need out of 21, so we have a quorum. Great. So the last 2 items for the agenda tonight are committee reports and approval of the committee work for the last term. Do we have any committees that wish to give a report tonight? Fiora, your hand is up. Is it still up, or are you raising it again?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to put it down.
That's okay. Thank you. All right. I would like to, in the interest of time, since it's 8 o'clock, I'd like to make a motion to thank the committees for their good work the subcommittees for their good work this past year, and move on from there. We don't have any committee reports. We can't really do much with the business.
Please count me in. It's Ethel Tyus.
I counted you, Ethel. You're good. The next item of the, we'll table that one for now. The next item on the agenda is adoption of our 2022-2023 CPA EST committee structure and goals. The proposal, which I circulated, was to have 4 subcommittees. One dedicated to environmental issues, one dedicated to sanitation issues, one dedicated to streets issues, and one dedicated to transit issues. And we had several subcategories that we wanted each of those committees to work on. For the Environment Committee, we wanted to work on air traffic noise. I hope you've been following the Stop the Chop legislation, which is advancing in City Council. The Environment Committee would also look at the rats and pest control issue, sewers and catch basin maintenance, and noise cameras. The Sanitation Committee, we talked about composting, containerized waste, especially the pilot program we'd like to participate in, and more public waste bins. Again, we saw the mayor announce just the other day that he is adding a lot of public waste cans. For our Streets Committee, we wanted to look at 4 things. Atlantic Avenue, which as you saw came up tonight in several points. Residential parking permits, alternate side parking, the schedule and the fines, and general parking and streets enforcement. And for the Transit Committee, we want to participate in the Brooklyn bus map revision, advocate for bus service improvements, and advocate for some changes to the bus rapid transit service, which exists on Utica and Nostrand. That's the motion that those 4 committees be established and for the next board year, and we'll work on staffing them over the summer so that when we hit the ground running in September, we are ready to address proactively each of those issues. Any questions? Ms. Tice.
I have a question. Is there a meeting the first week of July or second week of July? Because there's something on the calendar for EST in early July.
That's news to me.
All right. Okay.
Or maybe I've forgotten, but you mean on the CBA website?
Yes. I'll double check. Okay, thank you.
May I ask where that calendar is? Is it on the CBA website?
Yes, on the CBA website.
Thank you.
Ms. Tice, that appears to be this meeting because this Friday or whatever is the 1st, and so it appears to be the first week of July, but it's actually the last week of June.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Tuesday the 28th. No, we are not meeting in July. We are not meeting in August. We next meet on September the 27th. We're not on here. We should be on September the 20th. I'll make a note to the board office.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a second to the motion to approve the committee structure, subcommittee structure for the next board year?
Approved. Yes. Karen Gray.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. I suppose we can vote. Are there any questions on the motion? Mr. Crashes? You're muted, Peter.
I mean, I had my hand up for a little while, so and actually before the motion was made, but I would just make the observation that really only the Rules of the Road subcommittee has made any reports or met throughout the period that we adopted this idea. We at Rules of the Road met last month. There were 3 of us. We did adopt some priorities for the next year, but I'm just questioning, the functionality of this effort and using the structure.
It is not lost on me, that observation, that yours was the only committee that met regularly or at all, which is one of the reasons why we're shaking up the Etch-a-Sketch. And instead of doing the targeted subject subcommittees, which didn't seem to get any momentum, again, yours accepted, we thought it made more sense to divide up into the natural buckets. So we'll try that. And if it doesn't take, we'll try something else in the year 2023, 2024, but you probably have a new chair by that time, because I'll have proved my ineptitude of leading this charge. But again, the purpose of the subcommittees is to enable us to do proactive, fine-grained, granular work at the street level where we all know what's going on and communicating it up in the various ways that affect change, right? Are we advocating for a budget request? Are we advocating for a service enhancement? Are we advocating for a policy change? Are we doing a public forum, right? Are we getting the word out to the people who need to hear it? That's the job of the subcommittees. Your subcommittee did some good work on that, Peter, and I appreciate the work that's been done by that. But you know, that alone wasn't enough to make us want to keep with this structure. So we're going to try it slightly differently. What the Rules of the Road subcommittee did, in my view, can be folded well into the Streets subcommittee with a few added topics to discuss. But the other thing I would say is that we were a little open-ended this year. We were a little more, you know, DIY. Let the committees go play and come back to us with issues. I think by using this matrix this year, we're giving the committees more of a mandate to come back to us on, and we will roll out a schedule in the fall of reporting, and you know, we'll go with it. But at the same time, we'll be doing what we're doing at these bigger meetings where we have presentations from DOS, DOT, MTA, NYCT on larger topics. So we're going to keep working at it from both angles, being reactive to what's brought to us and proactive to identify the hotspots and get some change implemented. So we'll give it another try. It is, Ms. Tyus, do you still have your hand up for a new question?
Oh,
All right, then.
Sorry.
I will.
Accident, sorry.
No worries. In the interest of time, I'll call the roll for a vote on the motion to authorize the committees for the next board year. Mr. Atkins, Ms. Boyd, Ms. Collins, Mr. Gerber, Ms. Gray.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins.
oh, that's upsetting.
Jeannie Harris Blenman, Jennifer Jordan.
Yes.
Thank you, Zerzima Jordan.
Here.
Thank you, Peter Crashes.
Abstain.
Thank you, Francis Langley. Oh, had to leave, right. William Meehan.
Aye.
Thank you, Fiora Ortiz Joyner.
Yes.
Thank you. Carrie Tam.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark Thurton.
Yes.
Thank you, Ethel Tyus.
I agree, we should get organized.
Thank you, Robert Witherwax. Yes, Deborah Young.
Yes.
Thank you very much. All right. Just under 2 hours.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Harris Blenman. Just under 2 hours with the first 15 minutes didn't actually happen, and an hour and a half spent on open streets. May our agenda be a little more diversified next year and a little more member driven. So thank you all for a nice meeting, and thank you. If there's any final new business, please let me know. I see someone in the chat who I believe is gone, wanted to know if we're going to talk about alternate side parking. Wasn't on the agenda. We will certainly bring it up in one of our subcommittees next year. Any final new business or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Witherwax. This is great. I move we adjourn.
I don't hear any opposition to that, Ms. Tyus. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice summer.